Jonathan Luther John Cayce Jones from Jackson, Tennessee, was an American railroader who worked for the Illinois Central Railroad. As a boy, he lived near Cayce, Kentucky, where he acquired the nickname of Cayce, which he chose to spell as Cayce. On April 30, 1900, he was killed when his passenger train, the Cannonball Express, collided with a stalled freight train at Vaughan, Mississippi, on a foggy and rainy night. His dramatic death while trying to stop his train and save lives made him a hero. He was immortalized in a popular ballad sung by his friend Wallace Saunders, an African-American engine wiper for the IC. Marriage: Jones married Mary Joanna Brady, whose father owned the boarding house where Jones was staying. Since she was Catholic, he decided to convert and was baptized on November 11, 1886 at St. Bridget's Catholic Church in Whistler, Alabama, to please her. They were married at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Jackson on November 25, 1886. They bought a house at 211 West Chester Street in Jackson, where they raised their 3 children. By all accounts he was a devoted family man and teetotaler. Promotion to engineer: Jones went to work for the Mobile and Ohio Railroad and performed well and was promoted to brakeman on the Columbus, Kentucky to Jackson, Tennessee route, and then to fireman in the Jackson, Tennessee to Mobile, Alabama route. In summer 1887 a yellow fever epidemic struck many train crews on the neighboring Illinois Central Railroad, providing an unexpected opportunity for faster promotion of firemen on that line. On March 1, 1888, Jones switched to IC, firing a freight locomotive between Jackson, Tennessee and Water Valley, Mississippi. He was promoted to engineer, his lifelong goal, on February 23, 1891. Jones reached a pinnacle of the railroad profession as a crack locomotive engineer for IC. Railroading was a talent, and Jones was recognized by his peers as one of the best engineers in the business. He was known for his insistence that he get her there on the advertised, and that he never fall down arrive at his destination behind schedule. He was so punctual, it was said that people set their watches by him. His work in Jackson primarily involved freight service between Jackson and Water Valley, Mississippi. Both locations were busy and important stops for IC, and he developed close ties with them between 1890 and 1900. Famous train whistle: Jones was also famous for his peculiar skill with the train whistle. His whistle was made of 6 thin tubes bound together, the shortest being half the length of the longest. Its unique sound involved a long drawn-out note that began softly, rose and then died away to a whisper, a sound that became his trademark. The sound of it was variously described as a sort of whip or oil call, or like the war cry of a Viking. People living along the IC line between Jackson and Water Valley would turn over in their beds late at night upon hearing it and say, "There goes Cayce Jones," as he rolled by. Service at the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. During the World's Columbian Exposition at Chicago, Illinois, in 1893, IC was charged with providing commuter service for the thousands of visitors to the fairground. A call was sent out for trainmen who wanted to work there. Jones answered it, spending a pleasant summer there with his wife. He shuttled many people from Van Buren Street to Jackson Park during the exposition. It was his first experience as an engineer in passenger service and he liked it. At the fair, he became acquainted with number 638, a big new freight engine IC had on display as the latest and greatest technological advancement in trains. It had 8 drive wheels and 2 pilot wheels, a 2-8-0 consolidation type. At the closing of the fair, number 638 was due to be sent to Water Valley for service in the Jackson district. Jones asked for permission to drive the engine back to Water Valley. His request was approved, and number 638 ran its first 589 miles with Jones at the throttle to Water Valley. Jones liked number 638 and liked working in the Jackson district because his family was there. They had once moved to Water Valley, but returned to Jackson, which they felt was home. Jones drove the engine until he transferred to Memphis in February 1900. Number 638 stayed in Water Valley. That year he drove the engine that became most closely associated with him, for one time. That was engine number 382, known affectionately as LA 382. Or Cannonball. It was a steam-driven Rogers 4-6-010 wheeler with 6 drivers, each approximately 6 feet high. Bought new in 1898 from the Rogers Locomotive Works, it was a very powerful engine for the time. When a potential disaster arose, all of Jones' skill and the engine's responsiveness were put to the greatest test. His regular fireman on number 638 was his close friend, John Wesley McKinney, with whom he worked exclusively from about 1897 until he went to the passenger run out of Memphis. There he worked with his next and last fireman, Simeon T. Sim Wedburn 1900. Rescue of a child from the tracks. A little-known example of Jones' heroic instincts in action is described by his biographer and friend Frederick J. Lee in his book, Cayce Jones, Epic of the American Railroad. He recounts an incident in 1895 as Jones' train approached Michigan City, Mississippi. He had left the cab in charge of fellow engineer Bob Stevenson, who had reduced speed sufficiently for Jones to walk safely out on the running board to oil the relief valves. He advanced from the running board to the steam chest and then to the pilot beam to adjust the spark screen. He had finished well before they arrived at the station, as planned, and was returning to the cab when he noticed a group of small children dart in front of the train some 60 yards ahead. All cleared the rails easily except for a little girl who suddenly froze in fear at the sight of the oncoming iron horse. Jones shouted to Stevenson to reverse the train and yelled to the girl to get off the tracks in almost the same breath. Realizing that she was still immobile, he raced to the tip of the pilot or cowcatcher and braced himself on it, reaching out as far as he could to pull the frightened but unharmed girl from the rails. The event was partially spoofed in The Brave Engineer, in which the hero rescued a damsel from a Klitschko copyright bandit. Baseball player, Jones was an avid baseball fan and watched or participated in the game whenever his schedule allowed. During the 1880s he had played at Columbus, Kentucky, while he was a cub operator on the M&O. One Sunday during the summer of 1898, the Water Valley Shop team was scheduled to play the Jackson Shop team and Jones got to haul the team to Jackson for the game. Rules infractions. Jones was issued 9 citations for rules infractions in his career, with a total of 145 days suspended. But in the year prior to his death, Jones had not been cited for any rules infractions. Railroaders who worked with Jones liked him but admitted that he was a bit of a risk-taker. Unofficially though, the penalties were far more severe for running behind than breaking the rules. He was by all accounts an ambitious engineer, eager to move up the seniority ranks and serve on the better-paying, more prestigious passenger trains. Transfer to passenger trains. Jones in February 1900 was transferred from Jackson, Tennessee, to Memphis, Tennessee, for the passenger run between Memphis and Canton, Mississippi. This was one link of a 4-train run between Chicago, Illinois, and New Orleans, Louisiana, the so-called Cannonball passenger run. Cannonball was a contemporary term applied to fast mail and fast passenger trains of those days, but it was a generic term for speed service. This run offered the fastest schedules in the history of American railroading. Some veteran engineers doubted the times could be met and some quit. Engineer Willard W. Bill Hatfield had transferred from Memphis back to a run out of Water Valley, thus opening up trains number 2 and number 3 to another engineer. Jones had to move his family to Memphis and give up working with his close friend John Wesley McKinney on number 638, but he thought the change was worth it. Jones would drive Hatfield's engine number 384 until the night of his fateful last ride on engine number 382. Death. There is controversy over the circumstances prior to Cayce Jones' last, fatal run. In the account given in the book Railroad Avenue by Freeman H. Hubbard, which was based on an interview with fireman Sim Webb, he and Cayce had been used extra on trains 3 and 2 to cover for engineer Sam Tate who had marked off ill. They returned to Memphis at 6:25 on the morning of April 29, giving them adequate time to be rested for number 1 that night, which was their regular assigned run. The Frederick J. Lee biography, Cayce Jones, contended the men arrived in Memphis on number 4 at 9 o'clock on the evening of April 29. They were asked to turn right around and take number 1 back to Canton to fill in for Sam Tate, who had marked off. This would have given them little time to rest, as number 1 was due out at 11:35 p.m. In both of these accounts, Jones' regular run were trains 1 and 4. In a third account, trains 3 and 2 were Cayce and Sunweb's regular run, and they were asked to fill in for Sam Tate that night on number 1, having arrived that morning on number 2. In any event, they departed Memphis on the fatal run at 12:50 a.m., 95 minutes behind schedule, due to the late arrival of number 1. A fast engine, a good fireman, and a light train were ideal for a record-setting run. Although it was raining, steam trains of that era operated best in damp conditions. The weather was quite foggy that night, reducing visibility, and the run was well known for its tricky curves. In the first section of the run, Jones drove from Memphis 100 miles south to Grenada, Mississippi, with an intermediate water stop at Sardis, Mississippi, over a new section of light and shaky rails at speeds up to 80 miles per hour. At Senator Bayer, Mississippi, Jones passed through the scene of a prior fatal accident that occurred the previous November. Jones made his water stop at Sardis, and arrived at Grenada for more water, having made up 55 minutes of the 95-minute delay. Jones made up another 15 minutes in the 25-mile stretch from Grenada to Winona, Mississippi. The following 30-mile stretch had no speed-restricted curves. By the time he got to Durant, Jones was almost on time. He was quite happy, saying at one point, "Sim, the old girl's got her dancing slippers on tonight," as he leaned on the Johnson bar. At Durant, he received new orders to take to the siding at Goodman, Mississippi, wait for the number 2 passenger train to pass, and then continue on to Vaughan. His orders also instructed him to meet passenger train number 26 at Vaughan. He was told that number 26 was a local passenger train in 2 sections and would be in the siding, so he would have priority over it. Jones pulled out of Goodman, only 5 minutes behind schedule. With 25 miles of fast track ahead, Jones likely felt that he had a good chance to make it to Canton by 4:05 a.m. on the advertised. Unknown to Cayce, 3 separate trains were in the station at Vaughan, double-header freight train number 83, and long freight train number 72 were both in the passing track to the east of the main line. As the combined length of the trains was 10 cars longer than the length of the east passing track, some of the cars were stopped on the main line. The 2 sections of northbound local passenger train number 26 had arrived from Canton earlier, and required a saw-by for them to get to the house track west of the main line. The saw-by maneuver required that number 83 back up to allow number 72 to move northward and pull its overlapping cars off the main line and onto the east side track from the south switch, thus allowing the 2 sections of number 26 to gain access to the west house track. The saw-by, however, left the rear cars of number 83 overlapping above the north switch and on the main line right in Jones' path. As workers prepared a second saw-by to let Jones pass, an air hose broke on number 72, locking its brakes and leaving the last 4 cars of number 83 on the main line. Meanwhile, Jones was almost back on schedule, running at about 75 miles per hour toward Vaughan, and traveling through a 1.5-mile left-hand curve that blocked his view. Webb's view from the left side of the train was better, and he was first to see the red lights of the caboose on the main line. "Oh my lord, there's something on the main line," he yelled to Jones. Jones quickly yelled back, "Jump, Sim, jump," to Webb, who crouched down and jumped from the train, about 300 feet before impact, and knocked unconscious by his fall. The last thing Webb heard as he jumped was the long, piercing scream of the whistle as Jones warned anyone still in the freight train looming ahead. He was only 2 minutes behind schedule. Jones reversed the throttle and slammed the air brakes into emergency stop, but LA 382 quickly plowed through a wooden caboose, a car load of hay, another of corn, and halfway through a car of timber before leaving the track. He had reduced his speed from about 75 miles per hour to about 35 miles per hour when he hit. Because Jones stayed on board to slow the train, He was believed to have saved the passengers from serious injury and death. His watch stopped at the time of impact, 3:52 am on April 30, 1900. Popular legend holds that when his body was pulled from the wreckage, his hands still clutched the whistle cord and brake. A stretcher was brought from the baggage car on number 1, and crewmen of the other trains carried his body to the depot, a half-mile away. The headlines in the Jackson, Tennessee, Sun read, "Fatal wreck, engineer Cayce Jones, of the city, killed near Canton, Mississippi. Dense fog the direct cause of a rear-end collision on the Illinois Central. Fireman and messenger injured. Passenger train crashed into a local freight, partly on the siding. Several cars demolished." A Jackson, Mississippi, newspaper report described the accident. Legend begins. Jones' legend was quickly fueled by headlines such as, "Dead under his cab, the sad end of engineer Cayce Jones, the commercial appeal, Memphis, Tennessee," and "Heroic engineer sticks to his post at cost of life." Railroad wreck at Vaughan's on Illinois Central Railroad. A terrible fatality prevented by engineers' loyalty to duty. A passenger story, The Times-Democrat, New Orleans. The passenger in the article was Adam Hauser, formerly a member of the Times-Democrat telegraph staff. He was in a sleeper on Jones' southbound fast mail and said after the wreck, "The passengers did not suffer, and there was no panic. I was jarred a little in my bunk, but when fairly awake the train was stopped and everything was still." Engineer Jones did a wonderful as well as a heroic piece of work, at the cost of his life. The marvel and mystery is how Engineer Jones stopped that train. The railroad men themselves wondered at it, and of course the uninitiated could not do less. But stop it he did. In a way that showed his complete mastery of his engine, as well as his sublime heroism. I imagine that the Vaughan wreck will be talked about in roundhouses, lunchrooms and cabooses for the next 6 months, not alone on the Illinois Central, but many other roads in Mississippi and Louisiana. Funeral. The next morning Jones' body was transported on the long trip home to Jackson, Tennessee on passenger train number 26. On the following day, the funeral service was held in St. Mary's Church, where he and Janie Brady had married 14 years before. He was buried in Mount Calvary Cemetery. 15 Enginemen rode 118 miles from Water Valley to pay their last respects, which was a record. Illinois Central Railroad report on accident. A conductor's report filed 5 hours after the accident stated, "Engineer on number 1 failed to answer flagman who was out proper distance. It is supposed he did not see the flag." This was the position the IC held in its official reports. The final IC accident report was released on July 13, 1900 by A. S. Sullivan, General Superintendent of IC. It stated that Engineer Jones was solely responsible, having disregarded the signals given by flagman Newberry. John M. Newberry was the flagman on the southbound number 83 that Jones hit. According to the report, he had gone out a distance of 3,000 feet, where he had placed warning torpedoes on the rail. He continued north a further distance of 500 to 800 feet, where he stood and gave signals to Jones' train number 1. Historians and the press had questions about the official findings. In the report, fireman Sim Webb states that he heard the torpedo explode, then went to the gangway on the engineer's side and saw the flagman with the red and white lights standing alongside the tracks. Going to the fireman's side, he saw the markers of a caboose of number 83 and yelled to Jones. But it would have been impossible for him to have seen the flagman if the flagman had been positioned 500 to 800 feet before the torpedoes, as the report says he was. In any event, some railroad historians have disputed the official account over the years, finding it difficult if not impossible to believe that an engineer of Jones' experience would have ignored a flagman and fuses and torpedoes exploded on the rail to alert him to danger. Contrary to what the report claimed, shortly after the accident and until his death, Webb maintained, "We saw no flagman or fuses, we heard no torpedoes. Without any warning we plowed into that caboose." Injuries. Losses from wreck. The personal injury and physical damage costs of the wreck were initially estimated as follows: Simeon T. Webb, fireman train number 1, body bruises from jumping off engine 382 €5, $142.86 in 2014 dollars. Mrs. W. E. Bro, passenger, 1472 Rotblave Street, New Orleans, slight bruises a not settled. Mrs. William Detto, passenger, No. 25 East 33rd Street, Chicago, slight bruises left knee and left hand a not settled. William Miller, express messenger, injuries to back and left side, apparently slight $25. W. L. Whiteside, postal clerk, yard $1. R. A. Ford, postal clerk, yard $1. Engine number 382, Cannonball. $1,396.25, mail car number 51 $610, baggage car number 217 $105, caboose number 98,119 $430, IC box car 11,380 $4,000, IC box car 24,116 $55, total $2,996, an update indicated an additional $327.50 in property damage plus a settlement of $1 to Mrs. Bro for her injuries. Mrs. Detto was identified as the spouse of an IC engineer, and in the update her claim for injuries was still unsettled. There are no clearly authentic photographs of the famous wreck in existence. There has been some controversy about exactly how Jones died. Massena Jones said, when they found Jones, according to Uncle Will Madison, he had a splinter of wood driven through his head. Now this is contrary to most of the stories, some of which say he had a bolt through his neck, some say he was crushed, some say he was scalded to death. Later history of engines, for at least 10 years after the wreck, the imprint of Jones' engine was clearly visible in the embankment on the east side of the tracks about 2/10 of a mile north of Tucker's Creek, which is where the marker was located. The imprint of the headlight, boiler and the spokes of the wheels could be seen, and people would ride up on handcars to view the traces of the famous wreck. Corn that was scattered by the wreck grew for years afterward in the surrounding fields. The wreck 382 was brought to the Water Valley shop and rebuilt just as it had come from the Rogers Locomotive Works in 1898, according to Bruce Germer. It was soon back in service on the same run with engineer Harry A. Dad Norton in Chicago, but bad luck seemed to follow it. During its 37 years of service, LA 382 was involved in accidents that took 6 lives before it was retired in July 1935. During its career, the 382 was renumbered 212, 2012, and 5012. January 1903, criminal train wreckers caused 382 to wreck, nearly demolishing the locomotive. Norton's legs were broken and he was badly scalded. His fireman died 3 days later. September 1905, Norton and the 382 turned over in the Memphis South Yards. This time, however, the train was moving slowly and Norton was uninjured. January 22, 1912, 382 was involved in a wreck that killed 4 prominent railroad men and injured several others. It is called the Kinmundy wreck as it happened near Kinmundy, Illinois. An engineer by the name of Stroud was driving. Jones' beloved engine number 638 was sold to the Mexican government in 1921 and still ran there in the 1940s. Other people involved: Jones' African-American fireman, Simeon T. Webb, died in Memphis on July 13, 1957 at age 83. Jones' wife, Jannie Brady Jones, died on November 21, 1958 in Jackson at age 92. At the time of Jones' death at age 37, his son Charles was 12, his daughter Helen was 10 and his youngest son John Lloyd was 4. Jones' wife received $3,000 in insurance payments and later settled with IC for an additional $2,650. Other than these payments, Mrs. Jones received nothing as a result of the wreck or Jones' service with the railroad, as the Railroad Retirement Fund was not established until 1937. Jones' wife said she never had any thought of remarrying. She wore black nearly every day for the rest of her life. Jones' tombstone in Jackson's Mount Calvary Cemetery gives his birth year as 1864, but according to information his mother wrote in the family Bible, he was born in 1863. The tombstone was donated in 1947 by two out-of-town railroad enthusiasts who accidentally got his birth year wrong. Until then, a simple wooden cross had marked his grave. Casey Jones references in music. Casey Jones's fame can almost certainly be attributed to the traditional song, The Ballad of Casey Jones, recorded by Mississippi John Hurt, Pete Seeger, Furry Lewis, The Grateful Dead, and Johnny Cash, among others, including other languages and non-U.S. artists. Songs titled Casey Jones, usually about the crash or the driver, have been recorded by Vernon Dalhart, This Bike is a Pipe Bomb, Feverfew, Tom Russell, Leonid Uchasov, Billy Murray, The New Christy Minstrels, and Skillet Lickers. A well-known song by the Grateful Dead was written by lyricist Robert Hunter and guitarist Jerry Garcia in 1969. A pro-union protest song spoof of the Ballad of Casey Jones, written and sung by IWW union activist Joe Hill, titled Casey Jones. The Union Scab portrays a negative version of Jones. Casey Jones is depicted as a selfish person, refusing to join the strike movement of the South Pacific Railway Company. As his engine is badly in disrepair, he crashes from a bridge, dies and goes to heaven, where St. Peter wants him to break a strike of celestial musicians. But the scheme doesn't quite work. The rebellious musicians form a local union and threw Casey down all the way down the golden stairs, right into hell, where Satan urges him to shovel sulfur in the furnaces. The last and ironic line runs, "That's what you get for scubbing for the SP line." Hill's version of the song was later performed and recorded by Utah Phillips. Other songs about or related to Jones or the crash include, To the Dogs or Whoever a Josh Ritter from the Historical Conquests of Josh Ritter, Cayce's Last Rider Chris Christopherson, April the 14th, and Ruination Day Gillian Welch from Time Casey Jones becomes a simile for another great collision, that of the RMS Titanic, on April 14, 1912. St. Luke's Summer Thea Gilmore from Rules for Jokers, Casey Jones North Mississippi All-Stars, Riding with the Driver Motor Paragraph read, Casey Jones was his name Hank Snow, Freight Train Boogie Marty Stewart, What's Next to the Moon AC/DC, Casey Jones Union Scab Joe Hill, Casey Jones Gibson Brothers from Big Pine Boogie, Casey Jones Grateful Dead, Casey Jones Pete Seeger, Casey Jones The Black, Casey Jones Claudia Lanier, The Ballad of Casey Jones Band of Annuals, Grist for the Malady Milma Without You. Casey Jones Media references, a 1927 movie, Casey Jones, starred Ralph Lewis as Casey Jones, Kate Price as his wife, and a young Jason Robards Sr. as Casey Jones, Jr. A 1938 dramatic play by Robert Ardrey called Casey Jones stars a modernized version of the hero, Casey Jones. It was produced on Broadway with a critically heralded locomotive set piece by Mordecai Gurelik. In the 1941 Walt Disney movie, Dumbo, a song refers to the circus train as Casey Jr. early in the film. This inspired the Casey Jr. circus train attractions found at both Disneyland Park in Anaheim and Disneyland Park in Paris. In 1950 the Walt Disney Company made a new animated cartoon based on Casey Jones, entitled The Brave Engineer. Casey Jones was a television series loosely based on Jones' legend. It starred Alan Hale, Jr. as Casey Jones. Hale would later become well remembered for his role as the skipper on the TV series Gilligan's Island. The 1982 film An Officer and a Gentleman features a coarse cadence call about Casey Jones led by Sergeant Foley. Casey Jones is the vigilante comrade of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. An episode of The Real Ghostbusters features the ghost of Casey Jones. He abducts Peter Venkman, and always yells at him for more coal. Peter eventually realizes that Jones wants to repeat the journey that killed him, so that he can avoid the collision this time. A picosecond 3 trophy called Casey Jones for the video game Infamous, is awarded for performing a stunt on a train. Casey Jones is a cheat in the video game Railroad Tycoon 2 to instantly destroy all enemy trains. Neil Young's song Southern Pacific alludes to the Casey Jones legend by imagining a railroad engineer named Mr. Jones, who meets a less heroic but in some ways a more tragic fate. When he turns 65 years old, he is compelled into retirement by the railroad company as company policy. In the Season 5, Episode 3 of The Big Bang Theory, Leonard asks Sheldon Rough Night, Cayce Jones, when he complains about his experience at a model train shop. In Season 4 Episode 15 of The Walking Dead, Abraham makes a reference to Cayce Jones. None of us have slept more than a couple hours straight since we all went Cayce Jones. In a 1993 episode of Shining Time Station called Billy's Runaway Train, a play about Cayce Jones was done. In an episode of The Simpsons, Cayce Jones was mentioned by Mr. Burns' son, Larry. The episode is entitled Burns' Baby Burns. In the 1993 movie The Fugitive, while walking through a crash site involving a prisoner transport bus and a train, Deputy Gerard remarks of the conductor, "I bet he did a Cayce Jones." Cayce Jones is mentioned in the AC/DC song, "What's Next to the Moon?" in the lines, "Engineer wishing he was home in bed, dreaming about Cayce Jones." Museums in Cayce Jones's honor: the historic Cayce Jones Home and Railroad Museum in Jackson, Tennessee, Water Valley Cayce Jones Railroad Museum in Water Valley, Mississippi, Cayce Jones Railroad Museum State Park in Vaughan, Mississippi. References: A History of Railroad Accidents, Safety Precautions and Operating Practices, by Robert R. Shaw. p. 290. 1978. External links: Ballad of Cayce Jones on Find a Grave, photo of SimWeb.